Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for February 27th through March 5th. This week I read 2 books and DNF'd 1, I watched 5 shows, and I listened to 2 books. The book that I DNF'd this week is To the Friend Who Did Not Save My Life. This is translated from French and was published in 1990. This is a book that I was excited to read and a little bit confused by because it was a semi-autobiographical work of fiction about the author finding out that he had HIV. I originally saw this mentioned on Jen the Librarian's channel because she's doing an LGBTQ in translation project, but ultimately I just could not get through the way that this was written. There were very short chapters, but in those chapters that would span about a couple of pages, for example, there would be a total of 3 sentences because the sentences would just run on and on and on and on and on, to the point where you've forgotten the point of the sentence, you've forgotten who the sentence was about, you've forgotten who the characters that are mentioned are because you get weird details but not enough details to really actually care about the characters. I did give this a very hard try. I read over 130 pages, but ultimately I just couldn't finish this one. The first thing that I finished reading this week wasn't a full book. It was a chapter that could have been in a book but wasn't because the perspective of the chapter was not a perspective character in the book. The chapter itself is called Guarded in Darkness, and it's a removed chapter from A Curse in Ash by our very own Julie from Pages and Pens. I love Julie. I really enjoyed this book. I'm subscribed to her newsletter, and this was a thing that she sent out to the people that read her newsletter if they wanted to read it. I can't tell you too much about the chapter itself because of spoilers for the book, but what I can tell you is this chapter was in Bry's perspective, and I liked seeing that because we got to know a little bit more about him because he's not a perspective character in the book, and he's there, and sometimes you kind of doubt his motives, but it's actually really lovely to see how he thinks about things and how he reacts to things and be in his perspective. I think he might be a perspective character in the next book, but I'm not entirely sure, so I'm excited to see that. The complete book that I finished this week was The Storyteller, Tales of Life and Music by Dave Grohl. Listen, a thing you might not know about me is I don't actually really listen to all that much music. Obviously there's music on the radio and that type of thing, so I will hear it occasionally when I'm driving or in places that play the radio or whatever, and I do have some friends that are musicians, so obviously I've heard their music before. However, I'm not the type of person that has a favorite band. I'm not a type of person that knows a lot about many musicians. However, I've heard that Dave Grohl is a pretty cool guy with a pretty cool history and a lot of stories to tell, so I decided to pick this up. If you're going into this book looking for a complete autobiography, that's really not what this is. This is probably about 1/10 of the stories that he could tell you. On the flip side, I did really learn a lot about his life. If you are somehow not familiar with Dave Grohl, he is a famous musician. He is the frontman of the Foo Fighters. He also used to be in Nirvana. He's been in several other bands as well, which I learned about in this book. But then I also got to learn things about his upbringing and his friends and how he approaches concerts and performing, and that was a lot of fun. There is also a ton of name dropping in this book, not in an insidious way, but in a way where you're like, yeah, he's met a lot of other very famous people, and it is very cool to toss in there that time that you met so-and-so. Especially because Dave Grohl at heart is just such a big kid who is just such a big fan and such a giant nerd, and that's the part of him I connected to most. Additionally, the man can turn a phrase, so I very much enjoyed this. On to what I watched this week. I of course stayed current on the 2 seasons of RuPaul's Drag Race that are currently running, UK versus the World and the original flavor. And I don't know about you, but when I'm watching 2 seasons in the first week, sometimes I mix up who is on what season. Not in an overly ridiculous way, but in a way where I'm trying to sit here and figure out what went on in UK versus the World, because it's the one I watched first because it comes out on Tuesdays, and I'm going, okay, I know who's left because the finale is the next episode. What was the challenge? I remember that the runway was work of art, and now that I've said that out loud, I can remember that the challenge was coming up with original lyrics for another RuPaul song that had to do with where everybody came from. This is always a fun performance challenge, and for the most part they did very well in it. Additionally, it's all-star rules, so of course somebody who was big competition went home. This is not exactly a top 4 I would have called at the beginning, but I'm happy for at least a few of them to be there. In Drag Race Season 14, the queens were split up into 2 different teams, and they were performing panels titles that you would see at something like DragCon, which is coming back this year. I only assume it didn't happen last year. I actually have no idea. I've never been. Overall, nobody did super terribly at this. There were some people that stumbled over their words more than other people. I can relate to that. You have no idea how many takes I have to sometimes do to make these videos because my mouth just doesn't work properly. But that's the power of editing, baby. Additionally, this season will probably be the longest running season because nobody went home this week. So we're 9 episodes in and we still have 8 queens. On to something completely different that I hadn't seen before this week, we watched the entire first season of Upload. I had never heard of this before, but basically the premise is once you die, your consciousness is uploaded to a version of heaven. Depending on what your family can afford, you can go to somewhere very, very nice, or you can basically just be in a tiny little room by yourself and people can call you, but you can't do all that much of that because you have very limited data. In this, we follow somebody who ends up being uploaded well before his time, and you come to realize that maybe he shouldn't have died in the first place. And this is further complicated because he's on his girlfriend's family's plan, so they basically own his soul, which is a little bit weird. Because if they chose, they could just delete him at any point and stop paying for him. What I liked most about this is there is a lot of technology humor in it. He is sent to a very fancy version of heaven called Lakeview, and there are AIs everywhere, and they do things that are very, very funny. For example, there's an AI trying to get into a certain location, and it's going to one of those things where it's like, tap all of the squares that have cats in it, and it can't because it's an AI. There's also sometimes major glitches in what's going on. It is very, very fun. And then we got to the end of the season, and we realized there wasn't any more. However, the next season drops next week, so this is very well timed for us. Especially because there's a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of the season. While I was visiting my best friend, who by the way is the reason why my hair has gotten shorter and has some blue in it, and it looks amazing and I love it, we also watched a few more episodes of The Gilded Age. This continues to be beautiful. I really enjoy the characters. For whatever reason, while we were watching this week, I spent a lot of time looking at the characters and going, that one looks like if Meryl Streep and Laura Linney had a baby. Or that one looks like insert actor here, but change characteristic. Well, there's a guy that kind of had a Matt Smith vibe, but he had dark hair, for example. The costuming and architecture continue to be beautiful. There are definitely some things in this section that do require some trigger warnings, so be sure to look those up if you need to. But the plot is progressing in a very interesting way. There's a lot of moving parts, and I'm interested to see where it's going. Because period pieces are fun and there were no more episodes of The Gilded Ones to watch, we also watched the first few episodes of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. This is very good. I very much like this main character, and my best friend let me know that she is the one that voiced Lois on Family Guy, which is interesting. I didn't look that up to confirm it, so if it's wrong, let me know in the comments. This one is set in New York in the 1950s and follows a Jewish couple in their normal lives. He wants to be a comedian, so he basically works a 9-to-5 job and then goes off to do that at nightclubs, and she is very supportive. She brings along Brisket to try to get him better time slots, and it goes from there. I don't really want to explain what the turning point is because even though I kind of felt it coming at the very beginning of the episode, I was still a little bit surprised when it actually happened. Midge, our main character, is very smart, very charming, very funny, and I very much want to see how her life continues. Also, it was fun watching this with my best friend who had seen some of it before because in the first episode there's a flashback where the couple goes to see a comedy night and one of the comics is Lenny Bruce, and she's like, oh, that's funny because he comes back later, and I'm like, Lenny Bruce? I'm pretty sure that's the name of a real person. And she looks up, she's like, yeah, he was a real comedian. And I'm like, why do I know that? La Vie Boheme. To Lenny Bruce, to Langston Hughes, to the stage! So thank you, Jonathan Larson. On to what I listened to this week, the first one being Heartberries. This one is a memoir and it's only about 4 hours, so I believe I listened to it all in one day. This book is by and about an Indigenous woman who has mental health issues and has had some interesting life happenings because of that. As is pointed out by whoever did the introduction, I can't remember exactly who it was, this woman can turn a phrase. There's something very poetic and raw about the language she uses, and that is something that is addressed in the very end of this audiobook, because the end of the audiobook also includes an interview where somebody was asking the author about her choice in words, and about how sometimes critics will talk about Indigenous memoirs in particular about being very raw, as though that wasn't a choice that was made. There is a little bit of delicate subject matter, so know that going in if that's something you need to know about, and again, I always have a couple of links down below as to where you can look up trigger warnings. The other book I listened to this week was The Girls in the Garden. I believe in the UK This is also just called The Girls. It's by Lisa Jewell. I've never read anything by this author before. However, Leanne, whose channel I will link down below, definitely got me to read this because she kept raving about it in one of her recent videos. In this book, we have a mother and her 2 young daughters who have just moved to this property in London that has a communal garden in the back of it, and at the beginning of the book we know that something happens to one of those daughters. Basically, the one daughter finds the other daughter and we know that a crime has been committed. Then we flash back to a few months previous when they are just moving in and we learn about this whole cast of characters that lives in this area and try to figure out who perpetrated this crime against one of the girls. What I liked about this is it seamlessly went between about 3 different perspectives. One being Pip, one of the daughters, Claire, her mother, and then Adele, another mother that lives in the area and has for quite a long time. Through these 3 different perspectives, we get a lot of the puzzle pieces that each other doesn't necessarily know, and I was constantly trying to figure out who attacked Grace. You'd learn another little thing and it would kind of throw you in a direction, you'd learn another little thing and you're really hoping that it wouldn't be that person. And although I did come up with a correct theory as to who it could be, I still didn't really know until the end if I was right. And then of course I was right, but I wasn't completely right because I'd missed some details. That's annoyingly brief, but I think that's all I can tell you without biasing you one way or the other towards these characters. This is the type of book where I want you to go into it not knowing who I thought it was or anything like that, and just kind of learn about these characters on your own time and try to figure it out for yourself. And now I'm going to have to read some more Lisa Jewell books, so if you have any recommendations, let me know down below. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, and of course that link is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!